The nurse squeezed my IV bag twice and whispered, "Don't let them know you're awake. They're waiting for your heart to stop." I kept my eyes closed and my breathing shallow while my heart hammered against my ribs. Her name tag said Carla Bennett when she leaned close enough for me to see through barely open lids. She adjusted something on my IV pole and spoke louder for whoever was listening. "Patient remains unresponsive. Vitals declining as expected." Her hand found mine under the blanket and squeezed once. A warning. Then she was gone and I was alone with the beeping monitors and the knowledge that someone in this hospital wanted me dead. I'd been awake for maybe 10 minutes before Carla's warning, long enough to hear two doctors outside my door discussing how my condition was deteriorating rapidly and how the family should be prepared for the worst. Long enough to recognize that I felt fine apart from the pounding headache and the IV line in my arm. Long enough to realize I had no memory of how I got here or what had happened to put me in this bed. The last thing I remembered was driving home from the county courthouse after filing a motion to compel in the Westridge Medical Center malpractice case. I was the attorney representing the family of David Lawson, a 52-year-old man who'd gone in for routine gallbladder surgery and come out brain damaged after an anesthesia error. The hospital had been fighting us for 18 months, burying us in paperwork and filing motion after motion to delay discovery. We'd finally gotten a court order forcing them to turn over their internal incident reports and staff disciplinary records. I'd been driving home with that court order in my briefcase, feeling like we were finally about to crack the case open. Then nothing. Just darkness and waking up in a hospital bed with a nurse telling me to play dead. My phone wasn't on the bedside table. My clothes weren't in the closet. I was wearing a hospital gown and connected to monitors that beeped steadily, displaying numbers I couldn't interpret from my position. Through my barely cracked eyelids, I could see I was in a private room with bland cream walls and a window showing darkness outside. Footsteps approached in the hallway, 2 sets moving with purpose. The door opened and I kept my breathing slow and even, my body perfectly still. "How much longer?" a man's voice asked. Deep, authoritative. I recognized it from somewhere. Hard to say. Her potassium levels are climbing. Could be hours. Could be tomorrow morning. That was a woman speaking. Clinical, detached. "We need this handled before the family starts asking questions. Before anyone looks too closely at her admission paperwork." The man again. "Dr. Reese, we're managing the situation. The medication adjustment will accelerate the process. Natural causes, cardiac arrest due to head trauma. No one will question it." I felt someone approach my bed, heard the rustle of a white coat, smelled antiseptic and expensive cologne. "And the briefcase?" the man asked. "Secure in my office. Once she's gone, we'll dispose of it. The court order with it." My court order. The one that would force Westridge Medical Center to reveal their internal records. The one that would expose whatever they'd been hiding about David Lawson's case and who knew what else. The woman spoke again. "Dr. Garrett, you need to trust the process. This isn't the first time we've managed a complication. Miss Reeves here had an unfortunate car accident. Head trauma, brought in unconscious. We're doing everything we can, but sometimes patients don't survive their injuries." She paused. "Especially patients who pose significant litigation risks to this institution." So that's what I was. A litigation risk. They'd staged a car accident and now they were actively killing me to prevent their malpractice cases from going forward. I was in Westridge Medical Center, the very hospital I was suing, and they were poisoning me through my IV while documenting my natural decline in my medical chart. The footsteps retreated and the door closed. I wanted to scream, to rip the IV out and run, but Carla had warned me to stay still. She was risking something by helping me. I needed to trust that she had a plan. 20 minutes passed. Each second stretched into eternity. Then the door opened quietly, and Carla was back, checking my monitors with practiced efficiency. She pulled out her phone and held it where I could see the screen. "Can you move your right hand?" the text message read. I moved my fingers slightly against the blanket. She typed again. "They're poisoning you through the IV. Potassium chloride. Will cause cardiac arrest. I've been diluting the doses but can't stop them completely without raising suspicion. You have maybe 12 hours before the cumulative effect kills you." I moved my fingers again to show I understood. Another message appeared. "I have your briefcase hidden. Found it in Dr. Garrett's office. You're not the first patient they've done this to. I've been documenting everything for 6 months, waiting for someone who could do something with the information. You're an attorney. You can stop them." She set down the phone and spoke aloud while checking my IV. "Patient remains unresponsive. No change in condition." Then she adjusted something on my IV line and typed one more message. "Celine only now. Need to get you stable enough to move. Security changes shifts at 2 a.m. That's when we run." It was 11:37 p.m. according to the wall clock I could barely see. 2.5 hours to wait while pretending to be dying. Carla left and I was alone with my thoughts and my terror. I focused on breathing steadily, keeping my heart rate stable despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I thought about David Lawson's family. His wife Amy, who'd hired me after 3 other attorneys turned down the case. His daughter Sophie, who was 19 and had to drop out of college to help care for her father. David couldn't walk or feed himself or recognize his own family anymore. All because someone at Westridge Medical Center had made a mistake during his surgery and then covered it up. And I'd been getting close to proving it. Close enough that they'd decided I was too dangerous to let live. I heard footsteps in the hallway periodically, nurses making rounds, doctors talking in low voices, the occasional alarm from another patient's room, normal hospital sounds. Except nothing about this was normal. Somewhere in this building were doctors and administrators who decided that protecting the hospital's reputation was worth committing murder. How many others had died in rooms like this one? How many complications and unexpected declines were actually carefully orchestrated executions? At 1:30 a.m., Carla came back with a wheelchair. She checked my monitors and then leaned close. In 5 minutes, I'm going to inject something that will make your heart rate spike dramatically. The monitors will alarm. When the code team responds, there will be chaos. That's when we move. I need you to be able to walk because we won't have much time. She paused. Can you do this? I squeezed her hand once. Yes. She positioned the wheelchair next to my bed and readied a syringe. When she injected it into my IV port, my heart started racing immediately. The monitors erupted in alarms and Carla hit the code button. Code blue, room 412. I need a crash cart. Within seconds, the room filled with people. Doctors and nurses rushing in with equipment, shouting medical terminology I didn't understand. In the chaos, Carla disconnected my IV line and monitors. She pulled me up from the bed and I stumbled, my legs weak from hours of stillness. She steadied me and guided me toward the door while everyone else focused on the empty bed. We were in the hallway before anyone noticed. Carla moved fast, pushing the wheelchair with my briefcase underneath it. She'd somehow gotten my clothes and phone. We went down a back stairwell used by staff, avoiding the main elevators. My heart was still racing from whatever she'd injected, but my head was clearing. The headache remained, but the fog was lifting. We reached the ground floor and Carla pushed through an emergency exit. An alarm sounded, but we were already outside in the parking lot. My car is the blue sedan in the back row, she said, pressing keys into my hand. Drive to the police station. Don't stop for anything. I put all my documentation in your briefcase. Photos, medication logs, patient files, everything I could copy over 6 months. I grabbed her arm. Come with me. They'll know you helped me escape. She shook her head. I need to go back. If I disappear too, they'll destroy the evidence before the police can get a warrant. I'll say you woke up during the code and ran before we could stop you. Confused from the head trauma. Buy yourself a few hours. Carla, go, now, before security realizes you're gone. I ran to the blue sedan on shaking legs, got in, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot as carefully as I could manage. In the rearview mirror, I saw Carla walking back toward the hospital entrance, brave and terrified and completely alone. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over to vomit in a gas station parking lot. Then I called 911. I need to report an attempted murder at Westridge Medical Center, and I need police protection immediately. They're trying to kill me. The dispatcher's voice was skeptical. Ma'am, can you calm down and tell me what's happening? I'm attorney Diana Reeves. I was in a car accident. No, they staged a car accident. I'm suing Westridge Medical Center and they've been poisoning me through my IV to stop the lawsuit. I have evidence. I have a nurse who's been documenting everything. I need police at the hospital right now to protect her and to seize records before they're destroyed. There was a pause. Ma'am, are you currently taking any medications? She thought I was crazy, delusional. I forced myself to speak calmly. I'm an attorney with Crawford and Associates. I'm representing the Lawson family in a malpractice suit against Westridge. I have documentation of multiple suspicious patient deaths. Please send officers to the hospital and have them ask for Carla Bennett, a nurse in the ICU. She has 6 months of evidence. The dispatcher said she'd send a patrol car to my location. I gave her the gas station address and then called my law partner, James Crawford. He answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. Diana, it's 2 a.m. James, I need you to listen carefully. I'm alive, but Westridge Medical Center just tried to kill me. They staged a car accident and have been poisoning me through IV for hours. I have evidence. I need you to get to your office right now and prepare an emergency injunction. We need a judge to freeze all patient records at Westridge and order police protection for a nurse named Carla Bennett. Silence. Then, Diana, are you okay? Did you hit your head? James, I'm serious. Check the news for car accidents tonight involving me. There won't be one because it didn't happen. They faked my admission paperwork. I have medical records showing they've been administering lethal doses of potassium chloride. I have my briefcase with the court order we won yesterday. They were going to destroy it after I died. I could hear him moving now, becoming alert. Where are you? Gas station on Morton Street. Police are coming. I need you to believe me. I believe you. Stay there. I'm calling Judge Hawthorne right now. If what you're saying is true, we need emergency intervention before they destroy evidence. 2 patrol cars pulled into the gas station 15 minutes later. I stayed in the car until the officers approached with flashlights. I held up my hands so they could see I was unarmed. Diana Reeves? One officer asked. I nodded and got out slowly. I'm Officer Brandt. Dispatch said something about a hospital trying to kill you? I pulled the IV line from my arm where Carla had disconnected the catheter but left it taped. Blood dripped down my arm. I was a patient at Westridge Medical Center for the past 8 hours. They've been administering poison through my IV. A nurse helped me escape. Her name is Carla Bennett and she's in danger if you don't get to the hospital immediately. Officer Brandt exchanged looks with his partner. Ma'am, were you treated for a head injury tonight? They claim I was in a car accident. I wasn't. It's fabricated. I'm an attorney suing that hospital. They tried to eliminate me before our court-ordered discovery could expose their malpractice cover-ups. I opened my briefcase and pulled out my documentation. Here's the court order from yesterday. Here's my bar license. Here's my business card. Call my law office. Call Judge Hawthorne who signed that order. I'm not delusional. I'm telling you that doctors at Westridge Medical Center are murdering patients. Officer Brandt's skepticism was visible, but he took my information and made some calls. His partner examined the IV site on my arm, the hospital gown I was still wearing under my jacket, the wheelchair that was still in my car. After 20 minutes of phone calls, Officer Brandt's demeanor changed completely. Miss Reeves, Judge Hawthorne is issuing an emergency order right now. We're sending officers to Westridge to secure records and ensure the safety of Carla Bennett. We need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. I need to go to the hospital first. I need to know Carla is safe. Ma'am, you're in no condition. They were poisoning me for hours. I need blood work to document the potassium levels before it clears my system. I need photographs of the IV site. I need a rape kit, level evidence collection of what they did to me, and I need it done at a different hospital with police present to maintain chain of custody. Officer Brandt studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Fair points. We'll take you to St. Mary's Hospital across town. I'll call ahead for their forensic team. I rode in the patrol car to St. Mary's while Officer Brandt coordinated with his department. More units were being sent to Westridge. A detective was being called in. The local FBI office was being notified because this potentially involved healthcare fraud. At St. Mary S., a forensic nurse named Patricia examined me like I was a crime scene. She photographed the IV insertion site, the bruising on my arms where I'd been restrained, the small abrasions on my wrists from the hospital ID bracelet. She drew blood for toxicology, documenting every vial carefully. She asked me detailed questions about what medications I'd been given, what I'd overheard, what Carla had told me. I told her everything while she wrote it all down in precise medical notation. Your potassium levels are elevated but not in the immediately dangerous range, Patricia said after the lab rushed my blood work. Consistent with someone who's been receiving excess potassium but not yet at the point of cardiac arrest. Another few hours and you would have been in serious trouble. She showed me the numbers. Normal potassium is 3.5 to 5.0. Yours is 6.8. Anything over 7.0 can cause fatal cardiac arrhythmias. They were almost there. I felt sick again. Carla had saved my life by diluting the doses, by giving me those extra hours, by risking everything to help me escape. Is there news from Westridge? I asked Officer Brandt, who'd stayed with me throughout the examination. He checked his phone. Officers secured the ICU and located Carla Bennett. She's being brought in for questioning and protective custody. Hospital administrators are refusing to allow access to records without a warrant, but Judge Hawthorne signed one 20 minutes ago. Detectives are there now serving it. Relief flooded through me. Carla was safe. The evidence would be preserved. But then Officer Brandt frowned at his phone. There's a problem. Dr. Richard Garrett, the hospital's chief of staff, is claiming you never had a car accident. He says you checked yourself into the psychiatric unit yesterday afternoon for evaluation after making paranoid accusations about the hospital. He says you were given medication for your delusions and must have wandered away from the unit during the night. My blood ran cold. That's a lie. I was unconscious in a regular ICU room. Carla can confirm. Dr. Garrett says there's no nurse named Carla Bennett in the ICU. Says she's actually a psychiatric nurse who was assigned to your care. Says she may have helped you escape because you manipulated her into believing your delusions. They were trying to make me look crazy. Discredit me before I could expose them. Turn my credible testimony into the ramblings of a mentally ill person who couldn't distinguish reality from paranoia. Check my medical records from before yesterday, I said urgently. I have no history of psychiatric illness. Check my car. There should be no accident damage. Check with my office. I was there yesterday afternoon, not at any hospital. Check my phone records, my credit cards, everything. I have a documented timeline that proves I wasn't at Westridge until they brought me there against my will. Patricia, the forensic nurse, spoke up. Officer, I've done hundreds of psychiatric evaluations. Miss Reeves is oriented to time and place. She's coherent, logical, and showing no signs of delusions or psychosis. Her story is consistent and detailed. Her elevated potassium levels are real and can't be explained by psychiatric medication. Officer Brandt nodded. I believe you, Miss Reeves, but you need to understand that Westridge is mounting a defense. They're going to fight this hard. Let them fight. I have evidence. I have Carla's documentation. I have the court order in my briefcase that they were trying to destroy. I have toxicology proving they were poisoning me. I have my law partner who can testify I was at the courthouse yesterday, not checking myself into a psychiatric unit. I looked at Officer Brandt directly. And I'm going to bury them for this. Detective Laura Kane arrived at St. Mary's at 5 a.m. to take my formal statement. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She recorded everything while I walked her through the past 24 hours, starting with filing the court order and ending with my escape from Westridge. When I finished, Detective Kane sat back in her chair. Miss Reeves, I've been investigating Westridge Medical Center for 3 months. We've had multiple families come forward with concerns about suspicious patient deaths, but we haven't had enough evidence to move forward, until now. She pulled out a tablet and showed me photos. Do you recognize any of these people? I looked at the faces. All of them were older patients or people who looked seriously ill. I shook my head. Should I? These are patients who died at Westridge in the past year. All of them had families who were considering malpractice suits. All of them died of cardiac complications before those suits could be filed. My stomach dropped. How many? 19, that we know of. Detective Kane's expression was grim. We suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it. Hospital death reviews showed nothing suspicious. The medical examiner's office found nothing actionable in the autopsies that were performed, but the pattern was there: potential litigants dying unexpectedly. Carla said I wasn't the first patient they'd done this to. She's been documenting it for 6 months. Which means she may have information on the more recent deaths. If we can connect the patterns, prove these weren't natural deaths, we're looking at serial murder charges. Multiple conspirators. This becomes a major criminal case. Detective Kane leaned forward. I need you to walk me through your malpractice case. Help me understand why Westridge was so desperate to stop you specifically. I explained David Lawson's situation: the routine surgery, the anesthesia error, the catastrophic brain damage, the hospital's aggressive defense and their attempts to prevent discovery. We were about to get their internal incident reports. If those documents show a pattern of anesthesia errors or staff incompetence they've been hiding, it opens them up to massive liability. Not just for David's case, but for anyone else who was harmed by the same problems. So they decided killing you was cheaper than letting the truth come out. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Detective Kane said, I'm going to need you to be very brave. I need you to testify about everything that happened. I need you to face these people in court and tell the world what they did. I'm an attorney. I know how to testify. You're also a victim. That changes things. Defense attorneys will come after you hard. They'll try to discredit you, claim you're lying or confused or mentally unstable. They'll drag your personal life through the mud looking for anything they can use against you. Are you prepared for that? I thought about David Lawson, who couldn't speak for himself anymore. About Amy and Sophie Lawson, who'd trusted me to get them justice. About the 19 dead patients whose families deserved to know the truth. About Carla Bennett, who'd risked everything to save a stranger. Yes, I'm prepared. Detective Kane smiled slightly. Good, because we're going to take down everyone involved. Doctors, administrators, anyone who knew about this and didn't stop it. And you're going to be our star witness. Over the next 3 days, the case exploded. Detective Kane's investigation team executed search warrants throughout Westridge Medical Center. They seized medical records, medication logs, internal communications, financial records. They interviewed staff members who, once they realized the scope of the investigation, started talking. Carla Bennett provided her documentation: 6 months of photographs she'd taken with her phone, notes about suspicious patient deaths, medication records showing altered dosages, internal emails discussing liability management. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. For at least 3 years, a small group at Westridge had been identifying patients who posed litigation risks. High-value malpractice cases that could cost the hospital millions. They'd been systematically murdering these patients and disguising the deaths as natural complications. Dr. Richard Garrett, the chief of staff, had been orchestrating it. Dr. Linda Reese, the head of the ICU, had been executing the actual killings. 3 other doctors and 2 administrators had been aware and complicit. They'd gotten away with it because hospital death reviews were conducted by the same people committing the murders. Because medical examiner autopsies were rarely ordered for patients who died of expected cardiac complications. Because families grieving their loved ones rarely questioned the official cause of death. I'd stumbled into their operation because my court order was about to expose the malpractice problems they'd been hiding. Problems that had killed David Lawson and who knew how many others. They'd decided to eliminate me before I could reveal the truth. The national media descended on the story. Hospital murder conspiracy exposed. Doctors accused of killing patients to avoid lawsuits. Attorney survives attempted murder by medical staff. I gave carefully controlled interviews, always with James Crawford and Detective Kane present. I told my story calmly, presenting the facts without melodrama. The evidence spoke for itself. Within a week, 7 people at Westridge Medical Center were arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. Dr. Garrett and Dr. Reese were held without bail. The others were released on supervised conditions. The hospital's board of directors held an emergency meeting and fired everyone involved. They issued a public apology and announced they were cooperating fully with the investigation. They offered compensation to the families of suspected victims. But the damage was done. Westridge Medical Center's reputation was destroyed. Patients transferred to other hospitals. Doctors resigned. Within a month, the hospital announced it was filing for bankruptcy. The FBI investigation expanded to examine whether this pattern existed at other hospitals in the healthcare system that owned Westridge. They found evidence of similar liability management practices at 2 other facilities. The case kept growing, spreading like a cancer through the healthcare industry. I testified before a grand jury about my experience, walked them through every detail of what had been done to me and what I'd overheard. The grand jury returned indictments on all defendants. The trial was scheduled for 8 months later. In the meantime, I had my own recovery to deal with. The potassium poisoning had caused some cardiac damage that required monitoring and medication. The psychological trauma of knowing doctors tried to kill me gave me nightmares and anxiety that needed therapy. I couldn't go back to my apartment. It didn't feel safe anymore. I stayed with my parents for 2 months while I figured out my next steps. David Lawson's case was transferred to another attorney at my firm. I was too close to it now, too involved as a witness in the criminal case. But the evidence we'd been fighting for was finally available. The court order I'd been carrying in my briefcase led to the discovery of systematic anesthesia problems at Westridge that had harmed dozens of patients. The Lawson family got their settlement. It wouldn't bring David back or restore what he'd lost, but it gave Amy and Sophie financial security. Sophie was able to return to college. Amy could afford proper care for David. Carla Bennett became a protected witness. The police provided security for her and her family after death threats started coming in from people who supported the accused doctors. Some people refused to believe that doctors could commit such crimes. They accused Carla of lying, of betraying her profession, of being part of a conspiracy against Westridge. But Carla never wavered. She gave interviews explaining why she'd documented the deaths. I became a nurse to help people. When I realized what was happening, I couldn't stay silent. But I couldn't stop it alone. I needed someone who had the power to bring the truth to light. When Diana Reeves came in as a patient, when I recognized her name from the malpractice cases, I knew she was my chance. I met with Carla several times before the trial. We went over her testimony, prepared her for cross-examination. But mostly we just talked. About what it had been like to work at Westridge knowing people were being murdered. About the fear she'd lived with for 6 months. About the relief she felt now that the truth was out. I thought about quitting so many times, she told me over coffee one afternoon. Just walking away and letting someone else deal with it. But then I'd think about the families. The people who lost loved ones and never knew they'd been murdered. They deserved the truth. You risked everything to give it to them. So did you. You could have died that night. But I didn't. Because you saved me. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Carla asked, "Are you going back to medical malpractice law, after all this?" I'd been thinking about that question for months. I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away from anything medical related. But part of me feels like I understand the stakes now in a way I never did before. When hospitals go wrong, when doctors prioritize money over patients, people die. Someone needs to hold them accountable. Whatever you decide, you've already made a difference. 19 families are getting answers because of what we did. The trial began in November. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Medical records showing altered medication logs. Financial records showing the accused had received bonuses tied to reducing the hospital's litigation costs. Testimony from other nurses and staff who'd witnessed suspicious deaths but been too afraid to speak up. Testimony from family members of the deceased patients, who described how their loved ones had suddenly declined after threatening to sue the hospital. And testimony from me. I spent 2 days on the witness stand describing what had been done to me. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as confused, traumatized, possibly suffering from the head injury I'd supposedly sustained in the car accident they still insisted had happened. But the evidence was too strong. My toxicology reports, my medical records from St. Mary S., the testimony of Officer Brandt and the forensic nurse, the physical evidence of the IV site where poison had been administered. The jury heard recordings of conversations between the defendants discussing liability management and handling complications. They saw emails about me specifically, about how I was getting too close and needed to be managed before discovery. They heard Carla's testimony about what she'd witnessed and documented. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. They found all 7 defendants guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Dr. Richard Garrett and Dr. Linda Reese were sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The others received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. The judge called it one of the most egregious abuses of medical authority in modern history. I sat in the courtroom with Carla and the families of the victims as the sentences were read. Some people cried. Some showed no emotion. I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase what had happened. It didn't bring back the dead or undo the trauma. After the trial, I took 6 months off from practicing law. I needed time to process everything, to figure out who I was after being the person who'd survived and testified and helped take down a murder conspiracy. I traveled. I spent time with my family. I went to therapy consistently and worked through the PTSD. Slowly, I started to feel normal again. When I returned to work, I started a new practice focused specifically on healthcare accountability. I took on cases where patients had been harmed by systemic failures and institutional cover-ups. I worked with families to get answers about suspicious medical deaths. I consulted with law enforcement on healthcare fraud investigations. Carla left nursing for a while but eventually returned to work at a different hospital. She became an advocate for patient safety and whistleblower protection. She gave talks at nursing conferences about recognizing and reporting dangerous practices. We stayed in touch, not constantly, but regularly. Checking in, comparing notes on cases we were working on, occasionally meeting for coffee to remind ourselves that we'd survived something terrible together. 3 years after the trial, I got a call from Amy Lawson. David had passed away from complications related to his brain damage. She wanted me to know, wanted to thank me again for getting them justice, even though it had nearly cost me my life. He deserved better than what happened to him, Amy said. But at least the people responsible paid for it. At least other families won't suffer the same way because you and Carla stopped them. I thought about that after the call ended. About David and the 19 other victims whose deaths had been disguised as complications. About how close I'd come to being number 20. About how one nurse's courage and one lawyer's stubborn refusal to drop a case had exposed a conspiracy that could have continued for years. The system had failed. Doctors who'd sworn to do no harm had become serial killers. Administrators who should have protected patients had enabled murder for profit. But the system had also worked. Evidence had been preserved. Investigators had listened. Prosecutors had believed. Juries had convicted. Justice had been slow and imperfect, but it had eventually arrived. I still have nightmares sometimes. Still flinch when I see hospital gowns or smell antiseptic. Still carry the emotional scars of knowing I was minutes away from death while pretending to be unconscious. But I also carry the knowledge that I survived, that I fought back, that I helped ensure no one else would be murdered in a hospital bed while doctors discussed their declining condition in the hallway. Carla squeezed my IV bag twice and whispered a warning. That small act of courage saved my life and exposed a conspiracy that had killed 19 people. Sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest consequences. Sometimes one person speaking up can bring down an entire corrupt system. And sometimes surviving is just the beginning of making sure no one else has to endure what you did. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.